FCR 247, you're live in the mix. I'm your host, Twism White Peace, and today, man, I have got this fantastic entertainment and music, yet scientific. My God, it's just a whole conglomerate of what the is going to happen today. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you author, music publicist of Prince, Billy Joel, Bob Marley, Michael Jackson, Styx. Man, his area of expertise is what we're going to go ahead and call mass behavior. From the mass behavior of corks to the mass behavior of human beings, I introduce to you none other than Mr. Howard Bloom. Mr. Bloom, how are you today?
Thanks, Twiz. Doing extremely well.
Thank you. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. And of course, you you come with a mouthful. Like when somebody introduces you, you come with a mouthful. So I got to know real quick, what's it like? If I read correctly, it was 545 different radio stations? Was that correct?
Yes, I'm going on in about 6 hours tonight. Actually, I guess 9 hours tonight, 545 radio stations. I'm on the highest rated overnight talk radio show in North America, coast to coast. And I'm on once a week, usually on Wednesdays.
That's great. So what's it like to be on both sides? I mean, it's an interesting world we live in nowadays. So
that's for sure. What it's like is if you look at the politics and how absolutely screwed up things are, and how the two sides are living in totally different realities. I mean, different bubbles, totally. It is frustrating, even if you're on 545 radio stations once a week, to feel on the outside, because it is so hard to influence the discussion on the inside. There will be a debate next week between the two presidential candidates, and to not be able to influence the subjects that are brought up in that debate, or the arguments that are brought up in that debate, even if you are a regular radio personality, is, yeah, exactly, you got it, frustrating. So
So, and I share that frustration because I have a motto. My brand motto is classy, not trashy.
Right.
And that is, that's a call to, hip hop artists and people everywhere. What you take in is obviously what you're going to put out. And as somebody who highly wishes to be able to influence for the better and to be a voice for change and a voice for influence, it is frustrating to stand by and watch, knowing that no matter how hard I shout or scream, or what kind of creative song I put together, or who I could network with, that ultimately my voice is kind of drowned out by the time it reaches that point, right? So I share frustration. I do so much, especially in today's world, right?
Right. Well, no matter how, here's a blessing and a curse all at once. No matter how high you rise, there's always much higher to go. And that's great, because it means you have constant motivation to keep going up to the next level. But it's frustrating, because you want to be up there at the level of ultimate influence. You want to be up there either talking to whichever candidate you would like to be talking to. And again, help setting the terms of the debate. But very, very, very few of us ever get up to that level.
And especially in today's world, where you see, basketball players and hip hop artists, and some of them are, quite negative themselves, or in some ways breed what I like to call, that growth of negativity. Now, what do you, as somebody who's been through several what I'll call entertainment changes, what is something that you've seen be kind of just frustrating all the way throughout?
Well, okay, back when I was doing this, you have to understand how I got in. Look, I'm a science nerd. I got into theoretical physics and microbiology at the age of 10. I compiled my first scientific credentials when I was 12. I built my first Boolean algebra machine. I built, or I co-designed a computer that won some science fair awards. I had my first meeting. Remember, I'm 12. I had my first meeting with the head of the graduate physics department at the University
Right.
of Buffalo, my hometown university, to discuss the Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe and the interpretation of the Doppler shift. And then when I was 16, I worked at the world's largest cancer research facility and came up with a theory of the beginning, middle, and end of the universe that predicted something that wouldn't be discovered for 38 years called dark
And
energy.
we're actually, that's one of the amazing things that we're going to get into. And not only that, but we're also going to talk about the Big Bagel.
Yes.
And we're going to, yeah, we're also, yeah, I like I said, I did my research. And we're going to get into a lot of different things, such as the $2 million Moon Prize and things. But I want to lay the ground and the foundation for where you have drawn this experience from. You've been in so many different fields throughout all of these years, and some of them I can't even pronounce the name of. I mean, it's okay. I'm the rock in the room. It's okay. I'll take that willingly. But I say this out of all humility and respect, that reading the biography, and I don't mean the little short one, I meant actually the long one. I put myself through it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's a sense that you almost I have almost come to realize that the man sitting in front of me is no ordinary man. And so I want to lay the ground foundation for others to understand that you're not just another ordinary man, that you have been referenced to being one of the greatest minds of our time, that you're responsible for some of the biggest acts, but not only the biggest acts, in essence, what will be considered the biggest musical movements of my time, some of my time, and that is not to be taken lightly. So, with that being said, and with the education and the science that you have, where did you start? What you said you started out with the science and everything. Is that what you wanted to pursue, or if I remember correctly, you had said somewhere along the way that you kind of got tired of that and wanted to, what would you call it, the journey of the Beagle?
Oh, yes, the voyage of the Beagle, which is what Charles Darwin did. Yes, he took 5 years off and on a ship that was going around the coast of South America and mapping it, and he had adventure after adventure after adventure. So yeah, my journey into music was my voyage of the Beagle, was my going into a series of adventures to learn what I wanted to learn.
As you're leading into that adventure, right? As you're leading into that adventure, was that what you thought you were going to be doing?
Here's the deal. I never thought I'd be doing anything in particular at all. I just after that incident when I was 10 years old and I got involved in science, I just started reading 2 books a day. One book under the desk at school and one book when I got home in the afternoon. And then at the age of 12, after absorbing hundreds of books, I realized I was an atheist. And here's where the journey that led to music really began. I'd not confessed that I was an atheist to myself because I was looking forward to my bar mitzvah, because it would be the first party. I was not a popular kid. Kids did not like me in Buffalo, New York. My parents didn't seem to like me very much either. And this bar mitzvah was going to be the first party I was going to be invited to in my own hometown. Plus, there were going to be presents. So when the bar mitzvah was over, I spent 2 months writing thank you notes and, of course, not confessing to myself that I was an atheist, so I wouldn't blow it all. And then when the last thank you note had been sent out, I was able to confess to myself openly, yeah, I'm an atheist. Okay, 2 weeks later, come the Jewish high holidays. Very, very big deal in the Jewish calendar. And my parents are very insistent on getting me to the synagogue, even though they're not observant. And so they managed to get me in a suit. They managed to get me into the back seat of their 4-door Frazier automobile. They managed to drive me all the way to Richmond Avenue, which is where the synagogue is. And then I refused to go any further. So I am hanging on to the door frame of the car with both hands, and my parents are trying to drag me by the ankles out of the car and up the street. And I had a sudden revelation. that if first of all, I at the age of 10, I was brought into science by Galileo and Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Anton von Leeuwenhoek was the guy who invented the microscope. Galileo's brilliance was he took this brand new military instrument that was designed for seeing the troops of the enemy on the horizon before they knew you could see them. It had two lenses and a tube. And he took that device and he turned it up at the sky, which was considered absolutely ridiculous because everybody knew what was in the sky. That's God's underwear, and it's impolite to peek.
Right.
And Anton von Leeuwenhoek had been a draper in Holland, and he had used a lens to look at the fabric that he was importing to see how fine the weave was. And he took that lens that he used for horizontal viewing and turned it down and looked at pond water and discovered an entire world of what he called animalcules, invisible animals humans had never been aware of before. Yeah. So there I am hanging onto the door frame. My parents are pulling at my socks and practically pulling my shoes off. And I have a sudden insight. Because I'm an atheist, there are no gods in this scene. There are no gods above us in the sky. There are no gods below us in the earth. And yet there are gods in these scenes. Where are those gods? They're in my parents. They're in the absolute passion with which my parents are insistent on dragging me like a sack of meat, their firstborn son, up the street to the synagogue. And if those gods are inside of them, then those gods have got to be inside of me. And I suddenly realized my mission in life, one of them, is to take that lens and turn it inside. Now, this is not original because Freud did it. But it was a whole different approach to find the gods inside of us. And then when I was 16, and then I got hooked on the ecstatic experience and how the ecstatic experience is a part of the forces of history.
Out of body.
And then when I was 16, because I was unpopular, but was in a really nifty high school, the kids, of course, they voted the most popular kid in class president, the second most popular kid vice president, most popular Jew treasurer, and the most popular female secretary. And I
made last.
Yes, well, I didn't have any role in any of those ranks. I wasn't popular at all. But the brilliance of the school was it had functional committees that actually had to get things done. And when it came to getting things done, the unpopular kids, the really popular kids who didn't have a clue, they were perfectly willing to load that responsibility onto somebody they hated, as long as he or she could take care of it. So they named me the head of the program committee for 2 years in a row. Every morning there was a school assembly for 45 minutes. I programmed 2 of those assemblies a week, and I emceed 5 of them. So one day, the juniors came to me and they said, look, we're having a dance, could you advertise it? And they didn't realize how ridiculous that request was, because if there were a dance or party of any kind in Buffalo, New York, I was cordially invited to stay as far away as possible, preferably Cleveland. Nonetheless, I put a piece of music on the turntable. Now look, every 2 years, my parents would try to turn me normal, and it never worked. Yeah. And 1 year, their big effort was to send me to dance class for a year at the Rissia Synagogue in town. And that dance class proved definitively, I cannot learn the box step, I cannot learn the foxtrot, and I cannot learn the waltz. Nonetheless, to advertise this high school dance, I put a piece of music on the turntable behind the stage, and I went out on stage in front of the audience, and instead of dancing, I started to move, and I was moving in ways no human had ever seen before. I looked like a Looney Tune on a night when Chuck Jones, the guy who drew Porky Pig and all the rest of them, was on LSD. And I saw the pupils of my audience dilating, growing wider, and I saw their eyes widening, and I saw their faces melting. Right, and
that inner God.
Yes. So I felt their faces melting into one big common amoebic blob of energy. And it felt as if I was having an out-of-body experience. It was my first out-of-body experience. I felt like I was on the ceiling watching all of this take place down below me. And I saw that energy flow through me as if I were an empty pipe, go up to around my head, become utterly transmogrified somehow, and go back to that audience and opened their eyes even wider. And it was a continuous feedback loop. And it was, so here was the ecstatic experience that I had been after since I was 12 or 13 years old, hitting me for no reason, hitting me totally by accident, totally unexpected. And when it was all over, the audience did something it had never done in my time in that high school before and would never do again, not for homecoming queens, not for football heroes. Oh, it was more than that, Twiz. The audience, 350 people, surged down to the foot of the stage, picked me up on their shoulders, carried me out of the auditorium, and carried me up the walkway to the building above where we had our classes, and only then did they put me down. It was astonishing. So here, by total accident, I had tripped in to the gods inside of us and the ecstatic experience and how it connects. You know, William James, I discovered at 14. William James had a book called The Varieties of the Religious Experience. And I felt that title call to me as if he'd written that book precisely for me. And it took 4 months to track down that book. And in that book, William, because we didn't have Amazon in those days, and Buffalo's not a book-rich town. And so when I finally got it, it felt like William James laid out a bunch of ecstatic experiences like the one I just described to you on a table, but they were the experience of Saint Teresa of Avila, who founded a monastic movement that's lasted to this very day, of George Fox, the guy who founded the Quaker movement, a movement that has lasted to this very day. And these were experiences in which they had hallucinations and ecstasies and all kinds of strange stuff. And one thing, and it felt like James had laid these experiences out on a lab bench and said to me personally, look, I don't have the tools to understand these things, but when you come along 50 years later, you will have the tools. And the other thing that James said was, all of these experiences are psychopathological, but in the hands of the right person, the psychopathological can become the engine of history. So, so I finally had landed where I needed to go. And then we went through a lot of adventures. I have a whole book called How I Accidentally Started the 60s, about how I dropped out of college and accidentally helped found the hippie movement. And but when I got back to school, I graduated NYU, Phi Beta Kappa and magna cum laude, with graduate fellowships at 4 different universities in something that didn't have a name yet. Today it's called neuroscience. And I had a sudden realization over the summer before going to grad school, and it was that grad school was going to be Auschwitz for the mind. Why? Because among other things, well, I was interested in this ecstatic experience, and how many ecstatic experiences was I going to run across in a career for the next 50 years of giving paper and pencil tests to 22 college students in exchange for college credit? So that I realized, plus I was my wife's second husband, and she was beginning to hint that she was tired of having student husbands, and I didn't want to lose my wife. And one day, well, first of all, in my junior year, I was very serious about poetry, extremely serious. And I was taking all the poetry courses I could from the poet in residence at NYU. And one day he said, Bloom, wait until everybody leaves the classroom. Close the door, sit there. This did not sound good, Twiz. So I waited until everybody left. I closed the door. I sat in the bowling out seat. And he said, look, you, last year I asked you to be on the staff of the literary magazine. You never even showed up. This year I'm telling you, you are the literary magazine. You're the editor of the literary magazine. You don't even have a faculty advisor. The minute you walk out that door, you're it. Now walk out that door. So I walked out
throwing you to the fire, just throwing you to the fire.
So I walked out the door looking incredibly confused because I hated literary magazines. Look, if you had a rip-roaring orgy in a big room and you took a literary magazine and threw it into the room, the covers, the pale blue of the cover, was so soporific, sleep-inducing, and the text choices, the text-based choices were so appalling that it would empty the room in 2 minutes. So, so a kid saw me and he said, you look disturbed about something. Can I help you? And I said, yeah, I've just been named the editor of the literary magazine.
Yeah.
And he said, well, why don't we have a cup of coffee? Now, Twiz, I had not grown up among other kids. As I said, they wanted nothing to do with me. So I didn't know what
interaction was.
Yeah. So I didn't
Yeah.
know what having a cup of coffee was all about. But I followed him to a coffee shop. We sat down. I ordered a glass of water. He ordered a cup of coffee. And he asked me one of the most important questions in my life. If you could do anything you wanted with this magazine, what would it be? And I said, it would be a picture book. So I went out looking for a team of artists. I already had a team of literary people.
Yeah.
And we turned that magazine into an experimental graphics magazine that created an absolute furor on campus. They doubled our budget after the first issue.
Wow.
Have you ever heard of a budget doubling?
No.
And,
no. I've heard of budget.
Yeah, exactly. So the second issue caused a stir in the commercial art community, and I got calls from the art director at Look magazine, which was a great big glossy full color news magazine, and from the Evergreen Review, which was the leading bohemian magazine in the world, and from Boys Life, the Boy Scout magazine of all things.
I actually, I'm gonna be honest with you. I actually was
a reader of Boys Life.
Yeah. I was to receive that magazine, so
right.
I can't say I read every one of them, but I was very avid with that. I was actually, what do they call it, Kiwanis or something like that, Awanas, something like that. I was whatever the imitation version of a Boy Scout is.
Really? Oh God.
Yeah, well, so that's forever.
At any rate, so it was I had just graduated magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa. I had these 4 fellowships. It was the beginning of the summer. Actually, I had tried to kill myself. I had no sense of purpose. The day after classes ended for 4 years, I'd had a sense of vivid purpose every single day, get straight A's, and I did that for 3 years. No purpose. So I'd done a half-hearted suicide attempt, and I'd been thrown into a mental institution, and it was a learning experience. They let me out after 2 weeks for good behavior. So now I was disoriented. I didn't have a summer job yet. And I walked into the apartment of the most astonishing of my artists. And it was very strange. There was no furniture in the room. There was a wall-to-wall carpet. My artist, his wife, and his 3-year-old were all on the floor crying. And I asked what was wrong. And they said, our electricity's being cut off, our telephone's being cut off, they've repossessed our furniture, and we're being thrown out of our apartment. And I said, but that's impossible. Yeah, I said, that's impossible. Your work is fucking brilliant. And if anybody sees it, they're going to give you work. And if they give you your work, you're going to be able to pay the rent on your apartment. Give me your portfolio. I'll take it out for 2 weeks. That'll get you enough work to get by in life. And then I'll find a summer job. And and my artist said, well, look, I came to New York from Boston with my best friend to found an art studio. So if you take my work out, you'll have to take his too. And his friend's work was nauseating. It was absolutely nauseating. It wasn't art.
I'm sorry. I've always sat back and I've wondered, what would I do if anybody ever came to me and said, Twiz, we absolutely love your music and we love your stage performance, because that's what I'm known for. I'm known for my stage performance, right?
Right.
So, I value that more than I do a lot of other things, which is probably where I differ, right? But anyway, so I've always wondered what would happen if somebody came to me and said, man, your music is amazing. Your stage performance is out of this world. We believe that you got this, but you've got to do this. Okay. I mean, I didn't sacrifice. I'm not, like you said, I'm not laying on this floor right. I'm not trying to do anything and everything I can to extend my world just to say, oh, I can't do it, or you've got to bring this person, or to give you some kind of excuse. Absolutely not. Those opportunities come around once. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but frustrates me when I hear stories like that, right?
Well, I just want to check with you. So you look to me like you have had the kind of experience that I was describing having on stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been a very bad person in my life. I used to be an ex-gangster, and with that entitles a lot of stuff that I wish I'd done. But the only time I'm truly happy and not happy because of somebody else, happy with me, myself, my inner God, is when I'm at stage and I'm looking out and I see the awe and the expression, and I see the vivid colors of the lights, and I see the haze that just takes over. Like you said, it just kind of melts. Everything just melts. I'm watching myself rock these people. And instead of being hated for my beliefs or hated because of who I am or what I used to be or the things that I've done, every single person is looking at me like amazement. And in return, I look at myself like amazement. And God, man, there's no better feeling. There is no.
So you know that's one of the most vital experiences you can have in a human lifetime, and that most people don't have the privilege of having that. So at any rate,
my kids, I have 5, soon to be 6. We're getting ready to have our 6 kids.
Amazing.
And that would be that's the only thing even come close to leveraging out.
Right.
And you know, I mean, I'm a musician, man. That's what I do, right? I'm a forming musician. That's just what I am. I was put here. My energy was put here to perform and entertain. So,
okay, we're moving slowly toward the answer to the first question, which is what would you change in the entertainment industry if you could do it today? And so it's the beginning of the summer, and I tell this artist to get his portfolio together, and he puts the work of this friend who's a nauseating artist into it. I start taking it out, and it allows me to go to every major advertising agency in New York City, which is the heartland of advertising in the world. It allows me to go to every major magazine. It allows me to go to every TV network. It allows me to go everywhere in the world of media. And I begin to realize, hey, Bloom, you've landed in a periscope position. You know, the periscope on a submarine? You've landed in a position from which you can see, find your way into the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. And finding my way into that dark underbelly was very important to me. It went hand in hand with finding the gods inside. So at the end of the summer, I hadn't sold any artwork. I had gotten New York Magazine interested in doing a feature on our art studio. That was about it. So I called Columbia University and said, I won't be in this year. I'll be in next year. And because I'm obsessive compulsive, and once I start something, I can't stop it. And my wife was quietly threatening to leave if I didn't get out of school.
You said that she didn't want no more student husbands.
Yeah, right. And I wanted to find the lands where the gods are. So eventually I was featured on the cover of Art Direction magazine. I invented a new animation technique for NBC TV. And we did all of the advertising graphics for ABC's 7 FM stations around the country when they made the transition from top 40 to this brand new format that was very risky called progressive radio, where the DJs could play anything they wanted. And if they wanted to play entire albums, it was revolutionary. And ABC asked me to form an advertising agency to handle their account, but I didn't want to learn time buying because that's just a matter of numbers, and it's too dry for me. But then we have to go back to when I was 12 years old. When I was 12 years old, and when I was in 8th grade, one day a girl turned her face in my direction and looked at me. And it had never happened to me before. And then she did something even more shocking. She made eye contact, which really had not happened. Even my parents didn't make eye contact with me. And she said, and remember, at that point, I was 12. I was establishing my first scientific credentials. And and the only recognition I got from these kids, who just loathed me, was they called me the sickly scientist. So she turned to me and said, I told my mother, you understand the theory of relativity. Now, the lore of the time was that only 7 people in the world understood the theory of relativity. And I wasn't going to confess that I wasn't among them, that I did not
Right.
understand the theory of relativity.
Right.
So as soon
Right.
as school got out, I jumped on my bicycle, I pedaled to the local library, I walked in, the librarians literally knew me better than my mother did, and I said, give me everything you've got on relativity. And they went through the stacks and they shoved 2 books across the counter at me. One was a little tiny skinny book by Albert Einstein himself. One was a great big fat book by Albert Einstein and 2 collaborators. So I pedaled home as fast as I could, and I had learned at that age, always take the hard road. Never take the easy road. If you put yourself through a book you think you don't understand, by the time you reach the end of it, you will have understood something.
You will understand. Yeah, exactly.
So by 8 o'clock, 4 hours later, 8 o'clock that night, I was only 50 pages into the big fat book because it was 7 words of English on a page and all the rest was mathematical equations. And I didn't understand mathematical equations then, and I still don't understand them now. So,
me either.
So I figured, okay, I've only got 2 hours before my mom puts me to sleep. And if I don't understand the theory of relativity, by tomorrow morning when I show up in class, I'm humiliated. So I turned to the little skinny book. And in the little skinny book, it felt like again, this is by Albert himself, Albert Einstein. It felt like he reached out through the page, grabbed me by the shirt, put his nose up to mine, and said, Loom, schmuck, listen up, To be a genius, he said, it's not enough to come up with a theory that only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory and then explain it so clearly that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it. In other words, I had marching orders from Albert Einstein that if I was ever going to become an original scientific thinker, I was going to have to learn to write. And not just to be a good writer, to be an extraordinary writer. So I took my writing very seriously. And when I was building up the art studio, I realized that to fulfill the Einstein imperative, to fulfill Einstein's marching orders, I was going to have to start writing for magazines. I had already written and edited for the head of the Middlesex County Mental Health Clinic in New Jersey. So I had some scientific writing under my belt. I had already written for the Boy Scouts of America during a summer vacation, who had put me to work first they tried me on proofreading, and then they decided to move me up the next day. And they handed me the Boy Scout handbook and the chapter on, brace yourself, masturbation. And they said, can you rewrite this? And I said, yes. And so the old chapter had said you shouldn't masturbate because a long black hair is going to grow out of your left palm, 3 feet long, and your eyeballs are going to fall out. And that wasn't exactly an argument that was going to cut it in the 1960s.
Especially a scientific argument.
Yeah, right. So I wrote a whole new chapter about how you shouldn't do it because you'll feel guilty. And then they had me do their handbook on camouflage and stalking and tracking. And I wanted, look, here I was serving you if you were a Boy Scout. And if you were a Boy Scout and you read my handbook on stalking and tracking, I wanted you to be able to get so close to a bunny rabbit that it didn't know you were there until you were rubbing noses with it. So I came to believe that I could write about anything if I cared enough about the audience and had research and was able to do
whatever that specific, that one,
and
the final kind of thing,
Right. The final assignment they gave me was 12 Steps to Organize a Boy Scout Troop, which is the handbook that's used to organize a Boy Scout troop in a town that's never had a Boy Scout troop before.
Right.
So, and the irony was that when I was 11 years old, I had been thrown out of the Boy Scouts for incompetence at Morse code, and I've never heard of any other kid in my life being thrown out of the Boy Scouts.
I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody. I thought they took everybody and kept everybody. So
there I was at Cloud Studio, establishing it as the major avant-garde commercial art studio on the East Coast, and I wanted to start writing for magazines because that would force me to write for really mass audience, to write really, really deliciously.
Really
and
get out.
And I couldn't figure out how to do it. Now, meantime, our studio was in the East Village, and there was a designer 4 blocks away whose shop I had tripped into, and I'd started buying her clothes, and then we'd started designing clothes together.
Yeah.
So one day I walked into the office.
Ocean networking.
Right. So I walked into the office of an underground fashion magazine that was being bankrolled by Baron Woolman, who had bankrolled Rolling Stone.
Nice.
And I expected to. It was in the garment district in a big industrial loft, and I got off the freight elevator, which was the only elevator, and expected to put the portfolio down on a table and hear the three women in the room oohing and ahhing over the artwork, and that didn't happen. Because as soon as I stepped out of the elevator, they looked at my clothes, their jaws dropped, and they said, "Do you have more of these?" And I said, "Yes, I've got a whole closet of them." Why?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And they said, "Do you think you could write an article about them?"
Nice.
And I said, "Yes, of course." So I wrote the article that night and turned it into them the next day. And then they made me a contributing editor, and I wrote 175 pieces for them. So now I was writing for magazines. And then...
So, quick question. In the process of that, it seems like that was a pursuit that you wanted to do, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I want to make sure that I'm keeping the difference between what was kind of placed in front of you and what you chose to actually do, okay?
Yes, exactly. This was an absolute imperative. So, and then another one of the contributing editors started her own magazine. It was called Natural Lifestyles. And she made me a contributing editor, too.
Okay.
Now, meanwhile, back at the art studio, there was a guy named Matty Simmons. Matty Simmons had helped invent something for American Express called the credit card. And he had made a fortune. And the next thing he wanted to be was a publisher. So he bought a young woman's magazine called Ingenue, and then he had an idea. There was a magazine that the kids at Harvard put out once a year, and it went on sale on newsstands all over America, and it sold out in 2 hours. So he flew up to Boston, and he met with two of the kids who put together this magazine and said, "Look, I will set you up in New York City. You'll have lovely apartments, high prestige apartments. You'll have a lovely and high prestige salary. You'll have everything you want. I'm just asking you to turn out this magazine not once a year, but once a month." And they agreed to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the magazine that sold out on newsstands all over America was called the Harvard Lampoon. And the magazine that Matty established with these two guys from Harvard was called the National Lampoon. And because Matty treated me like a father, and he really liked our artwork, he said, "Why don't you art direct this for me?" So I took the project back downtown to the Lower East Side where my studio was, and brought it in. And within a couple of weeks, remember the artist whose work was so bad it was nauseating?
Yeah.
He convinced half of the other artists to throw me out of the studio because he said, "Look, we're going to be getting this great big chunk of money every single month. Why do we need Howard anymore? And if we throw him out, we can divvy up his share."
Yeah.
So, but the secret deal was he was really trying to take over the art direction of the magazine himself, and he was an incompetence.
There's always some back reason.
Right. So he made a botch of the magazine, and they lost the account 8 months later. Meantime, and then they all went back to what they were when I found them, and the leading artist, the one who was so brilliant, died of alcoholism at an early age.
Oh, man.
No more national career. His career had been killed by his best friend's greed to art direct the National Lampoon. So
I hope I don't fall for. My biggest fear is I end up like Mac Miller or any of the potential greats that had every opportunity but got drowned out because of something else, right? So like when I hear once I hear stories like that, I mean that's very personal. You know what I mean?
Well,
like very
relatable.
It
shows that when you become, in order to become a superstar, which is extraordinarily difficult, and almost nobody is able to do it, you not only have to do everything right yourself, and by right I mean true to the fucking gods inside of you, but you, and true to that audience experience that we were describing, you have to have a team, and it has to be a really, really good one. So we'll go into, if we can get into it, we'll go into Prince's team later, which is a very good example of that.
We're gonna round back into that. We're definitely gonna round back into that.
So, but here's the deal. So one day I was covering a parapsychology convention for Natural Lifestyles magazine. Now, up until now, I got up at 6 in the morning, went naked to the typewriter. It was a Remington manual typewriter. You had to hit the keys for that typewriter with a sledgehammer to get the typewriter to operate. And I wrote from 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the morning. Then I got dressed, went into the art studio, came home that night, and sat there at the typewriter again until 11 o'clock at night with a pot of coffee.
Every day.
And I was 7 days a week, and I was getting tired. So they threw me out of the studio, and I was covering a parapsychology convention one day for Natural Lifestyles. And so I was there hanging out with all the mind readers and the spoon benders and the people who'd been abducted by UFOs. And somebody
the Las
noticing,
Vegas acts.
Noticing that I had a pad in my left hand and a pen and was constantly taking notes, thought I was a journalist, and walked up to me and said, "Would you like to edit a magazine?" And I thought, wow, if I could edit a magazine, I wouldn't have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I could do my writing during the day. And I could live out the Einstein imperative. And it doesn't matter what kind of magazine it is, because look what I did for the Boy Scouts, despite being a Boy Scout, failure. So I didn't ask what the magazine was about. He gave me a time and a date and a location for an interview. Now, Twiz, in those days, we did not have Google. Today, you would have Googled the person you were having a meeting with, right? So you know everything about it by the time you walked in. There was no Google. There was no way to find out who this guy was, and what his magazine
was. Blind into this
absolutely cold. And he explained to me that the magazine was called Circus, and I thought, okay, elephants and clowns. I'm not really fond of circuses, and then he said, no, it's about rock and roll.
Oh, good.
And so that's how I got into rock and roll. And then I started, I had grown up listening to Rachmaninoff, Beethoven, Bartok, Stravinsky.
Speaking of, real quick, I read that you're what's called the greatest press agent of rock and roll, American music and rock and roll. I had it wrote down and I can't read my writing now, but
that's the gist of it. You've got pretty much
the whole thing. Quote on the website that says you're the greatest press agent of American music and rock and roll.
That's what Derek Sutton, the manager of Styx and 10 Years After and Jethro Tull, said. And a bunch of other people said it too. So, so now we're getting up to that because I'm suddenly immersed in this environment where I've got to just do a crash course in rock and roll
the
music.
2 hour Einstein thing, right?
Right.
Like the 2 hour, Right.
Plus, my publisher came to me and he said, look, in Germany in Europe, there are these 2 magazines that sell 1 million copies each. One of them is in Germany, it's called Bravo. One is in France, it's called Salut les copains. And each of them sells 1 million copies in a market that's a fifth the size of the United States. So that means that theoretically, there should be room for a 5 million selling magazine in the United States. Plus, I want my magazine to read like Time magazine. He set me this problem. So I went to work on this problem for the next 10 months. I started dissecting Bravo, Salut les copains, and Time magazine as if they were frogs on a table, on a lab bench.
Okay.
And then I came back to him and I said, look, if you give me access to your sales figures and you allow me to work some correlational studies, remember, I came out of science, I guarantee you we'll sell magazines. And he was very reluctant, but he turned the sales figures over. And I finished, and then I came back to him and said, okay, here's a new format for the magazine, breaks every single rule that you've ever had. But again, if you implement it, or you allow me to implement it, I guarantee you we will sell magazines. So he let me implement the new format. We increased it in circulation 211% in the next 12 months.
Wow.
Wow.
That's like, and then some, right? And that's, wow, 211%. I mean, that's taking That's taking a pebble and making a boulder out of it. I mean, wow.
Yep, and a boulder of gold.
Yeah,
it made him,
yeah, totally.
It literally made him a wealthy man.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow,
So one day, Chet Flippo, who was one of the founding editors of Rolling Stone, he founded Rolling Stone's New York office.
Yeah.
Chet sent me by messenger, a great big manila envelope. And writers and editors do not send you things by messenger. You send them things by messenger.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I opened it up, and it was 6 pages on a little guy in a converted broom closet, a windowless broom closet, who was turning straw into gold. And it said that this person, whoever it was, had created a new magazine genre, the heavy metal magazine.
Yeah.
And it was me. Chet was writing he was writing on the history of rock journalism, and that was his 6 pages on me.
Wow.
So that's apparently what I did.
Yeah, right. When you have to say, you did what? I did what?
Right. So then my publisher came to me after 18 months, after a year and a half. Now remember, I had never worked a job for anybody before. I had co-founded an art studio. I was an owner of that business.
Yeah.
And he said, "Don't you think it's about time for you to get a raise?"
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, I've heard of those raises. So Rags Magazine had disbanded, and the editors had gone off. One of them had gone off to Vogue. One of them had gone off to co-found a magazine with Gloria Steinem called Ms. They'd gone off to important places. And I called all of them, and I said, what do I ask for in a raise? And they said, describe what you did. Now, the day I walked into my meeting with the publisher, without knowing what the magazine was, on my right, as I walked in, there was a broom closet, a converted broom closet. There were 2 guys packing their stuff. Those were the 2 editors.
Oh, no.
And on my left was the office of the publisher, with 7 windows overlooking the river.
Yeah.
And so I had been hired and replaced 2 people. And when I left, it took 5 people to replace me.
Wow.
So when I described what I did, they said, you should be getting a 60% raise.
Yeah.
I went to my publisher and said, here's what I need, a 60% raise. And he said, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And I, just out of pride, turned in a 6-month notice. And I found a new editor for him. And I trained the new editor, and I wrote a 57-page booklet on how to turn out the format.
I mean, that's nice.
And then the editor one day that I had hired and was training said, I want you to meet somebody. And he introduced me to Seymour and Linda Stein. Seymour Stein is the founder of Sire Records. Sire Records in those days had Eno and Echo and the Bunnymen and the Climax Blues Band and the B-52s and a bunch of people like that. And eventually Seymour would sign somebody named Madonna.
Yeah.
So Seymour's record label was distributed by Gulf and Western, the biggest conglomerate at that point in history. And it distributed 14 record companies. And Seymour got me hired to create a public and artist relations department at Gulf and Western for its 14 companies.
Wow.
Yeah. And that began.
And then probably each of those had like 10 artists.
Well, no, the deal, I very rapidly realized that 12 of the companies were a joke. 12 of the companies that any record that they put out didn't stand a chance in hell of going anywhere. And only 2 of the record companies were for real. One was Sire Records and one was Dot Records. Dot Records was number 3 on the country charts and was trying with all its might to become number 1. I started working on those 2 record companies, and one day the head of, or the A&R person, A&R means artist repertoire, it's a talent scout. A talent scout for Paramount Records, which was a dead losing company, was an amazing person. His enthusiasm for the acts he signed was just a sheer delight to see. Of course, none of them stood a chance of going anywhere, period. But one day he hit me with a problem that I couldn't dodge. He said, look, tomorrow I'm having a showcase for this girl that I just signed up from Brooklyn. She's a 13-year-old from Brooklyn, and she's going to be a star, a Godzilla, a Super Smash, yada, yada, yada. And I knew none of what he was saying could possibly happen. But because I was head of artist relations, that meant I had to show that the company was with these artists, that we cared about. Now, look, I'm a very honest person. So if I went
to
it's
hard for you to...
No, if I went to one of my artists and we weren't working on him, I told him that.
Wow.
But I had...
What did that cost you, though? What did that brutality cost you? I mean, what did that honesty cost you?
Well, I'll tell you in a minute. So I went to this performance at the Plaza Hotel, which was just a short, wonderful walk through Central Park away.
Yeah.
And sat in this amphitheater, like, with rounded nightclub-style tiers.
Yeah,
sat at my little table facing the stage, and all of a sudden, this 4'8" squashed African-American 13-year-old stepped out on the stage and into the spotlight, and the minute she did, it felt like she had grabbed you by the trachea, she'd put her nose up to yours, and she'd said, sit, stay still, can't, obey. And she held us in her grip, all of the people in that room, for the next 45 minutes, and then she walked off the stage. It was one of the most amazing performances I had ever seen in my life.
Nice.
Now, we had a problem. Golf and Western's 14 record companies were run by a guy named Tony Martell. And Tony Martell had discovered before I got there that his 16-year-old son had leukemia.
Oh,
and leukemia back then was a death sentence. So Tony had dropped all of his record company responsibilities. He came into the office at 9 o'clock in the morning. No other record company president did that because they had to be out of clubs at night checking out bands. So they came in at 10, 11 in the morning. And he locked his great big wooden double doors, and we never saw him. So there was another company Gulf and Western owned called Paramount Pictures, and it was brilliant. And it was at the height of its powers. And it was run by a 5'4" titan named Frank Yablans. All of us had heard his name. People spoke of him in tones of awe. None of us had ever seen him. And Tony Martell went to the two guys
the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain.
So Tony Martell, or Frank Yablans, the president of Paramount Pictures, went to the two guys who ran Gulf and Western and said, look, see how that little pissant record company of yours is losing you money? See how my company, Paramount Pictures, is making you money? If you put the record company under my control, I guarantee you'll make money.
I'll do the same thing.
So the next day, we all walked in, and there was a room that we knew of as the Xerox paper room, because our secretaries went there to refill the Xerox machines. The light was never on, but there were tons of Xerox boxes. And we walked in, and that room was brightly lit, and there were no Xerox boxes. And it turned out that what the Xerox boxes had been sitting on was a conference table. And so we saw that conference table with chairs neatly positioned around it. And at every single at every single place, there was an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with a list of things. We had no idea what they were, and a yellow pad and a sharpened pencil. And we were told we were having a staff meeting. We had never had a staff meeting before. So we all trooped into that room, and Tony Martell, our 6'1" president, took the head of the table, and he started to talk about how we were losing money, and as a consequence, we needed to save money on things like yellow pads and sharpened pencils. And then all of a sudden, we felt a presence behind us at the door. And it felt as if 1,000 laser beams had just gone off, as if trumpets were blaring, as if military drummers were drumming, and as if whoever had arrived at the door had arrived on a storm cloud. And we felt the presence of this man behind us as he walked down the length of the table toward Tony Martell. And as he walked toward Tony Martell, Tony shrank and shrank and shrank in his seat. And finally, Tony slid off of his seat like a jellyfish, and Frank Yablans took over. And Frank Yablans looked at the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with the list of things we didn't know anything about, and he turned to the guy on his left, the department head on his left, and he said, "You, what are you doing about this record?" And I had heard about bullshitting at oral exams at universities, but I had never seen it. And all of a sudden, I saw it. This guy spun such a vivid and astonishing story that it was beyond belief, except you knew that none of it was true. And then you went to department head number 2, and he said, "You, what are you doing about this record?" And once again, another brilliant, extemporaneous, creative attempt. And then he got to me, and I stood up and said, "Mr. Micheal, I'm not doing anything about this record. In fact, I'm not doing anything about any of the records on the list. None of them stand a chance in hell." But yesterday, I saw, and then I described to him the act you saw. Yeah, right. And her name, by the way, was Stephanie Mills. And when I was finished, Yablans stood up without saying a word and walked in utter silence out of the room. So as we were doing a scrum, you know, when there are a dozen people trying to get through a door at once, there's a scrum that you really don't notice. The vice president over my head grabbed me by the arm so hard that I had the marks of his fingers in my arm for the rest of the week, red marks.
Wow.
And he said, "You fucking none. If you ever do that again, you're fired." And when I headed toward my office, my secretary was way outside our space. She was trying to anticipate me at the pass. And she said, "Mr. Yablan's office called. They want to see you at noon tomorrow, and they want to see Stephanie Mills. Mr. Yablans is calling a meeting of all of his department heads."
Bring it in, yeah.
And 2 weeks later, the vice president who told me I'd be fired was fired, which I was very sorry about because he was a very decent human being.
Good person, but poor decision making, right?
Right. And from that point on, Yablans made me an unofficial member of the staff of Paramount Pictures. Nice. So whenever they were putting together a blockbuster or had a troubled movie,
bring you in.
Yes, exactly. And he must have told them, "Look, let him do anything he wants to do. Whatever it is, he'll deliver results."
Yeah.
So at the end of the year, we were sold to ABC Records.
Okay.
ABC Records, they flew a vice president in who said, "Go about business as usual. There will be no blood flowing in the corridors of this company," which I interpreted to mean do everything you can to save your skin because there's about to be a bloodbath. And 2 weeks later, 57 people in the record company got pink slips and only one person wasn't fired. And that one person was me. But all of my staff had been fired. So I resigned. And the next day, the same vice president from the West Coast was in my office. He said, "Get out a blank piece of paper." I did. He said, "Put your name at the top." I did. He said, "Put the names of the staff members you want to keep underneath yours." I did. He said, "Fill out the amount of money you want paid to each of you." I did. I gave us all a 20% raise.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was the head of public and arts relations on the East Coast for ABC's record company. And then I got a call from the lawyer who had negotiated the deal. And he said, and I don't have anything to do with lawyers. I mean, I don't know the business end of these things.
Yeah.
And he said, "Do you know why we were able to sell that pissant little record company for so much money to ABC, don't you?" And I had no clue, none whatsoever. And he said, "Because of you." And I didn't believe him. And then he tried to explain. He said, look what you did for DOT and for Sire Records. You doubled those two companies in value. The result is that when Gulf and Western's record operations were sold to ABC, Seymour Stein, the president of Sire Records, flew out to the West Coast and said, "If you get rid of Bloom, you're going to lose me." And Jim Fogelsong, the president of DOT Records, flew out to the West Coast and said exactly the same thing. So that's why you're in such a pretty position this company.
Question.
Yeah.
During this time period now, are you still doing by choice your desire to fulfill the inner gods, or have you now gotten lost onto some journey that you didn't see coming?
No, I was on the path to the gods within.
So you're still on your path. You're You're still on this voyage of yours. You're still living these adventures.
Right.
And during this time period, do you ever stop to look back and say, wow?
Never. Always
Why?
look forward. Always
look forward.
My
Nice.
motto was, and brace yourself. My motto was never stop to smell your own shit. Just keep moving forward. If there is a mud storm, you just keep crawling forward. Never crawl back. And that's what I did. So one day, when I got to ABC, there was a record at number 3 on the charts, on the pop charts. We had never had any such thing at Gulf and West. So I was eager to work on this record, and I discovered something. The whole staff, the West Coast public relations staff, was all white. And at that point in history, if you can believe this, it was unhip to work on black artists. So none of them would touch this record. Not a single one. So I discovered that the manager of this group was about to fly in from California to New York. He was married to Diana Ross. He was the father of Tracy Ross Ellis, or whatever her name is, Tracy Ellis Ross, and he was based here. So I got a limo, and I went out to the airport to pick him up and show him how much we cared about him. But I really had ulterior motives. I knew that we would be baked in traffic at 5 o'clock in the afternoon after I'd picked him up. And I would have him as a prisoner. And I said, Bob, I know your band prides itself on its democracy. I know that every member is proud of being equal to every other member in the group. But if you let me focus all attention on the lead singer, and if you cover my ass with the band, I guarantee you I will give you a star. And he did. He did exactly what I asked. And I focused all the attention on the lead singer. And see if you've heard of her. Her name is Shaka Khan.
Yes, I know her. I know who she is. Yes, I know of her. Yes.
Right.
Yes. In fact, I have to say that if it wasn't for the influences of individuals like her at that time era, that I don't think we would have, obviously, my genre. So I really value a lot of what we'll call the hip-hop history, because these are pioneers, and I consider her to be such a pioneer. You know, I mean, was ahead of her time and in a field that doesn't want her there, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Right. So, and Prince felt the same way about Shaka Khan. So you're not alone. So I'm going to skip over a whole lot of this story.
Okay.
And it took me about 5 years, something like that, to work out a technique that I called secular shamanism.
Okay. Secular shamanism?
Right. Remember, I'm a scientist.
Like a shaman, like an Indian shaman? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And what it meant was, if you came into my office, once I had my own PR company and could do things my own way, if you came into my office and you were interested in working with me, Wham's manager did this, for example. I would sit you down and say, look, if you expect me to fashion an artificial mask for you, and sit back like a guy in a plaid suit with a cigar in his hands, saying, kid, with this image, I'm going to make you a star. Then I'm going to send you. Then I'm going to send you to my best competitor immediately. I don't do that.
Yeah.
If you're going to work with me, you have to understand music is not about an exchange of pieces of plastic. It is not about an exchange of downloads. It is not about an exchange
of connection.
Exactly. It is an exchange of human soul. And if you're going to work with me, my job is to find the gods inside of you. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, you're up against an album deadline. You sit down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in front of a blank laptop screen to write a lyric. You know you cannot possibly write a lyric. You don't even know how you've ever written a lyric in the past. And yet, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a reasonably good day, there's a lyric in front of you. And on an unreasonably good day, maybe once or twice in your life, that lyric is so perfect, it feels like it wrote itself through you.
Yeah.
My job is to find the gods inside of you that wrote that lyric.
That create that, exactly.
And when you go on stage, you feel the pupils of the audience dilating, you feel their faces melting, you feel that energy go through you, you have that out-of-body experience, and you are danced like a marionette,
Yes.
like a puppet for
Yes.
70 minutes on stage.
Yes.
I'm going to
I
find the
love it.
gods inside of you that dance you. And then I'm going to introduce those gods inside of you to your everyday, ordinary, hello, how are you, fine, thank you very much self.
Okay.
And we're going to work from there. And I'll come back every year and we'll do it all over again, because every year those gods are going to be changing inside of you.
Yeah, they change. Yeah.
Right.
No.
So what's missing from the entertainment industry today is that approach.
Soul.
I also told you that you don't just owe your audience your songs, you owe your audience your life. Why?
Everything.
Yeah, because that soul that you are is going to come across so powerfully that kids are going to hang the poster of you on their walls when they're 12 years old and going through a massive hormonal shift from children to adolescence.
And
you're going to be, you know what a trellis is for a tomato plant? It's this
you're going to be
you're the trellis on which other people will be growing.
Yeah.
So that soul connection is absolutely vital. And remaining true to God's inside of you is absolutely vital. And what's missing from let me just finish. What's missing from entertainment
go ahead. Yeah.
Is icons are being sold off for ginger ale commercials and automobile commercials and stuff like that. And it destroys that soul-to-soul connection. Absolutely destroys it. So kids no longer have icons whose genuine
products. They have products.
Yeah, right. So they don't have people whose souls they can grow on right now in the celebrities that they see. And that is one of the most vital things in entertainment, and it's missing right now.
I have a statement that just kind of reaffirms that, you know, if you're a real entertainer, like I value and pride myself to be. And notice I don't say a rapper or things like that. Yes, I'm in hip hop, but I embrace that hip hop is open into many facets. I don't go out there and just blah, 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 blah. So I say entertainment because it's a broad scope of things. But in my life, in my world, I live it one fan at a time. So that super fan that I have for that moment, however long that moment may be, could be a day, could be an hour, it could be one tweet, it could be for the rest of my life. I'm gonna live through them. I'm gonna talk to them like they're a normal person. I'm gonna ask them about their days. I'm gonna show them that they are of value, and by in such, I become value.
Right.
And so yeah, I live one fan at a time. My biggest thing though is you got all this knowledge, and I kind of want to say, man, it's just not like that, because I don't see that, right? That approach that you talk about, the ideas that you have, the mindset that you went and built these acts with, or built these books with, or took these journeys with, I just don't see that anymore. And I almost feel like because I don't see it, that must mean it's not real anymore. And therefore, if it's not real anymore, what am I chasing? What am I working for? What God am I trying to satisfy inside of me if I don't? I kind of lost that purpose. Like, where's, where you were sitting there a little while ago, you was like, man, I woke up one day and I had no purpose, right? Well, I without accomplishing what I'm trying to do, I have no purpose.
Right.
Like, my purpose in my head, in my heart, my God said to me, my purpose is this. So if you had an act, so say you're here, you got your PR business going, the act comes, I sit down in front of you and I say, look, I don't have writer's block. I've got all these performances. I know what I'm confident, I'm comfortable. But then you look at them and you say, so where's that God? What's that God? And you say, I am that God.
Right.
So how would I explain that to you in a conversation of where I'm trying to go if all I see is the goal, but I don't know how to connect it to? I feel it. I know it's there, right?
Right. Well, you got to start with your own motivation, and I would never have allowed you to get into the state of despair. That told you that these goals are not alive in the entertainment industry anymore, or that would say that you're insane for pursuing the goals of making that.
So a minute ago, like you said, one of the things that's lost is the idea of selling the soul of the idea, the story, the connection, the things like that. And like we both agreed, today's world is more about giving them a product. And so in the sense of giving a person a product, you've taken away everything that made that product good. You understand what I mean by
right?
It's like an indie artist before they go mainstream. That indie artist is the best. And then they go mainstream and it's like, oh my God, what happened to you? You know what I mean?
Right.
So even with some, like, I feel like, so let's hypothetically create a situation here. We've got an artist, and let's say it's a rock artist, not even hip hop or anything like that. Let's say it's a rock artist who has a great band and they're loyal, they're solid, so you don't have to worry about that. And he's got the writing, he's got all the performance and everything like that. And he knows and he feels inside that he's going to be something, and it's all the perfect package. But the guy comes into you, he sits down and he says, you know, Mr. Boom, I don't know how to answer your question. What then?
Well, the process is, another thing that I would tell you is, don't expect any results from my company for the first 6 weeks. Because for those first 6 weeks...
You got to give it time, right?
Yeah, but also, I'm going to be reading everything you've ever written. I'm going to be listening to every album you've ever made. I'm going to be looking at every album cover.
Actually doing homework.
Yeah, I'm going to be studying you. And I'm going to basically compile a bio of you before we ever meet. But then I'm going to insist that I be allowed to come out to your environment, whatever that is, and that we sit down for anywhere from 1 to 3 days with no intercessors, no assistants, no wives, no managers, nobody in the room but you and me.
And just learn each other.
And that's the secular shamanism. That's where I'm going to find the story of the gods inside of you. And then, like, let's take Prince, for example. So by the time I got Prince in 1981, I had evolved this technique, secular shamanism. It took me 7 years from the time I first entered publicity. And I made these demands. And but before that, look, every Monday I sat down and read every single trade paper there was, and there were 3 of them in those days. And I had noticed that on the R&B charts, there was this artist I'd never heard of who was moving up the charts, the Black Album charts. And then I noticed that his album had gone gold. And then I noticed that his album had gone platinum. And it was a person that I'd never heard of before. And I followed everybody. And then I got a call saying Bob Cavallo, who manages Earth, Wind, and Fire, which is my band, has got a new act, and he'd like you to work on it. And I said, okay, fine. And I laid out my terms and conditions. And then I got a call from Warner Brothers out on the West Coast. And Warner's had an A-plus level staff, Harvard, Princeton level people. And this extraordinarily articulate woman said, look, you're not going to be able to work with Prince. We tried to set up 2 interviews for him on the West Coast.
I read that. He choked out one of them.
He wouldn't talk to one of them. He didn't say a word. And the other one he tried to choke. So I insisted on seeing Prince in his own environment after I'd studied everything there was. And they flew me, of all places, to Buffalo, New York, my hometown. Not Prince's hometown. Minneapolis is his hometown. But he had camped out at the Shea Theater, where I had seen a movie when I was 11, to rehearse his Dirty Minds tour. So I went to the Shea Theater at 11 o'clock at night. I sat in the empty audience portion, watching as Prince and the Revolution rehearsed. And then I went up on stage. The 2 of us went backstage. We found an empty room with a door that could lock. We locked the door, and Prince and I were there from 2 o'clock in the morning until somewhere between 6 and 9 o'clock in the morning, getting the story of his life.
And just you and him,
Yes, absolutely. Would not have worked. Would not have worked if there were anybody else in the room. Simply because I was soul diving. That's what secular shamanism is. And then I flew back to New York with my little TRS-100 computer, the very first laptop computer, organizing the notes into a coherent story focused around his passion points, his imprinting moments in life. And then I had the whole thing typed up, and I sent it to Prince. And I told Prince, look, I'm going to set you up for 3 days in a row of interviews in New York City, 8 interviews a day.
You gotta do them. You gotta do them.
Then I'm going to send you out to LA, and you're going to do 3 days of interviews, 8 interviews a day out there.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm sending you is what you told me. It is the story of who you are. It's the story of your passion for music. And when a journalist walks into the room with you, first of all, never say, as I said to the previous journalist, you have to treat this as if this is the only journalist you've ever met in your life. Secondly, no matter what question he asks you, answer with the story that's in these notes that I'm sending you.
Always stick to the script. Always stick to the script.
It's like doing your best hits your greatest hits on stage. You've done them a million times, but you do them every time as if you've never done them before. As if that audience is your first. That writer, and they were all men writers in those days, that guy will go home to his wife that night and say, honey, I'm the greatest interviewer in the world. I asked this absolutely brilliant question. How do you categorize your music? And I got this amazing story out of this kid named Prince. That's how I prepped you. And then something would happen like this. One day I got a call from John Mellencamp. And John didn't call that often. And that's an understatement. He almost never called. And he said, look, Heinz ketchup. In those days, Heinz ketchup only came in glass bottles. The plastic squeeze bottle was not common yet. And in those days, you had to spend a half an hour shaking that bottle of ketchup, pounding on the bottle of ketchup, banging it with a knife to get it to come out of the bottle. Your hamburger was cold by the time the ketchup came out. So Heinz ketchup had a brilliant idea, turned that into an advantage. And they used Carly Simon's song Anticipation. Now they wanted to use John Mellencamp's Hurt So Good. And John said they offered me $1.25 million, which was a lot of money in those days.
Wow.
And what should I do? And I said, John, what do you want to be in 15 years? Do you want to be making money for your audience, or do you want to be living off of your investments? And John said, I want to be making money in front of my audience. And I said, then you have to turn down the ketchup commercial. And here's why. Because imagine a giant city like Jerusalem in the days of Isaiah with walls that are 5 stories high. And you are a person locked out of those walls. Every teenager is a person locked out of those walls because he throws himself out of his family's home when he's 12 or 13 years old. The same happens with women, with girls. And all of a sudden he feels like a nobody, like an absolute nobody. And you were standing there outside the walls of that city, raising your fist in the air and saying, I have a right to be. I am important and have a right to exist. And that's what you are now. And you are doing that for hundreds of millions of other people in your position. But if you accept that ketchup commercial, it's like the gates opening to the city, you're walking in, and you're being one of the guests at the dinner parties. You are no longer that voice outside the gates. You are that city. You are its part of that. So John turned down that commercial, and his manager, Billy Gaff, who had managed Rod Stewart's career, quit on the basis of that decision. But that was the necessary decision to keep John in touch with who he was and to allow John to continue that exchange of souls with his audience. So that was the advantage of finding the gods inside.
And this all happens because of that time you spend with them. That's that's your you live and breathe and die by this philosophy.
Yes, exactly.
Well, buddy, whenever you're ready to spend 3 days with All right, let's move on a little bit. I had you're revered as being up there with Darwin, Newton. Someone's called you the next Stephen Hawking. Elon Musk praised you and your project, something called the $2 billion Moon Prize. Now, before you explain what the $2 million Moon Prize is, what's it like to have Elon Musk praise you? I mean, come on. I mean, of people that, said, hey, Howard Blue's a great guy, or he's smart, or whatever. mean, Elon Musk is
Well, in
that's
2000
like Leonardo calling you a great painter or a great inventor or something. You know what I mean? Like,
well, in 2005, I was dragged out to a space conference in California.
yeah,
I'm located in Brooklyn, New York.
yeah,
And I saw Elon Musk speak. And
okay,
Elon had not flown anything yet. He had not
yeah,
even
yeah.
flown a tin can with a firecracker in it.
Yeah, he was still just
Yeah. And the people at NASA were saying he'll never fly anything.
okay.
But Elon said, when I got out of college, I asked what three things would do the most in my lifetime to change humanity. And my answers were the internet, alternative energy, and space. So I
Yeah,
started on the internet and I helped build PayPal and I made $1 billion.
yeah. I was
Then I
I
skipped,
was watching
right.
the interview.
So
Go ahead,
then
go ahead.
I jumped over number 2, alternative energy, and went directly to number 3, space.
Okay.
When I saw that guy speaking, and it took me years to figure out what was happening, something
Yeah,
went off in me.
yeah,
And it took me 10 years of thinking that through to realize that I apparently have an alarm in my gut that tells me when I am seeing a person, a superstar, a
yeah,
person at a mythic level. But
yeah.
I
That
knew
awe
that minute,
factor. Yeah.
the kids 110 years from then would
Wow.
be modeling their lives on Elon's
After
life.
wow. So,
So I had 4 phone conversations with him,
okay.
and I couldn't even tell him why I was on the phone with him. I was wasting his time because
Oh
I
my
didn't
gosh.
know why I was on the phone with him. It was
Oh
because of that
no.
alarm bell in my gut. And it, as I said,
Yeah.
it would take me 10 years to figure that out.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
but since then, look what Elon has accomplished. He had his 100th
Yeah.
flight
Yeah.
about a week ago.
Yeah.
A
Well, he
Starlink.
is the future of space. He is.
He's the
I know you've
future
got
of
Bezos. I know
America.
you've got Bezos, and you've got NASA, and you've got, I think it's called what, the ULS or something like that, or ULA
Well,
or whatever.
right.
Yeah. But I'm gonna be honest with you. None of them have the visionary mind and or the ability to. In essence, he's the Tony Stark of our time.
Yeah.
He has the mind and the ability to create and get done exactly what he's trying to do. Which, you know, we're talking about making space part of home, and to
Right.
do that, that takes structures, that takes routines and services. I mean, how you drink water, how you gonna get rid of waste, there are so many factors and things that go into this. So Elon Musk, I feel, has not only the, like I said, the visionary mind, but the creative process to be able to knock out more than anybody else in his competitive field. So I mean,
More
that's,
than
you
more
know,
than anybody else I've seen in my lifetime. In my
yeah, yeah,
entire
yeah. I'm glad we
lifetime.
agreed on that's. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad we agreed on that. A lot of people argue, oh well, Bezos is this and that. I don't care. I believe firmly in Elon and he's going to get it done.
Yeah.
And I hope that I'm able to witness that, you know, very hands-on in my lifetime,
Right.
and not just from a distance. You know, and
Right.
I want to be that. You know what I mean? I want to be the first rapper to perform in space. You know, that's where I'm trying to go with it. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like, you know, just so many. Space is open. Space is home. Space is the future. Space is potential. Space is limitless ideas and no boundaries. So, I mean,
And I wrote a little manifesto. It's actually a 100-picture visual manifesto
okay,
called Garden the Solar System, Green the Galaxy.
okay,
And it's about taking ecosystems to space,
okay,
taking entire ecosystems to space.
yeah, yeah,
And that's really our destiny, because,
yeah,
you know, we're not the only creatures on the face of this planet who can do research and development. Bacteria
exactly.
do research and
Yeah.
development. And
Yes,
the
we
result
do.
is that 20 miles beneath your feet and mine, bacteria are turning raw rock, basalt and granite into bio stuff,
Yeah,
into potential green stuff. So they have a lot more vision than we do because we think we've run out of resources.
yeah,
Bacteria, no, we haven't. For every ounce of biomass on this planet, there are 100 million ounces of non-living stuff, dead stuff. And what's the basic imperative of life? To kidnap, seduce, and recruit as many dead atoms and molecules as possible and bring them into the grand enterprise of life. Now, once upon a time, this was a poison pill of stone. This planet is the mother of all climate catastrophe. I mean, in its early days, for 3 hours, the temperature will go up 88 degrees, and the surface of this Earth will be scalded with this toxic stuff called radiation. And then for 3 hours, it would be dipped 88 degrees, it would become 88 degrees colder, and it would be dipped in this equally toxic stuff called darkness. And then, because it had a wobble, a tilt to its axis, every turn around the sun would produce 4 massive climate changes called summer, winter, fall, and spring.
Winter, fall, yeah.
And then every 22,000, 44,000, 100,000 years would come an ice age or a global warming. And this is before there were any tailpipes and smokestacks. This was nature's way of doing
natural
things.
Natural cycle.
Yeah. And life was so tenacious that it managed to green and garden the place despite all of this.
Over and over. Right.
Yeah, despite 142 mass die-offs. And if you take a plane from New York to LA and you look out the window, once you get past Pennsylvania, where everything is green, everything turns brown. And you realize just how little life there is on this planet, and how we've just begun to green and garden the place.
Only certain areas, certain sections.
Right. So if we have managed to green and garden one poison pill of stone in the last 4 billion years, there are a zillion poison pills of stone above our heads, just waiting to be gardened and greened. So I went to that space conference. I was dragged there by one guy from the National Science Foundation, which is the Vatican of Science, a senior risk analyst from NASA, and a whole bunch of other people from the National Space Society. And I met Buzz Aldrin. And Buzz Aldrin convinced me that we needed a group that is now called the Space Development Steering Committee.
Boy, you took it. That was the next key point on the button. Yeah, go ahead. And
Edgar Mitchell, the 6th man to walk on the moon, was also one of the members of that group and was a huge supporter of what I was doing. And then I did a series of opinion pieces in the Scientific American on their website, and one of them called for a permanent space transport infrastructure. And Jeff Bezos picked up that piece, and he retweeted it to his God knows how many followers. So that's what I've been doing in the space community. But remember, science was my base when I was 10 years old.
Yes, I was going to say you've definitely walked an interesting journey. I mean, your journey of the Beagle has taken you on brilliant points of interest here. Now, real quick though, before we leave the space talk, because we've got about 20 minutes or so left here, and before we get out of here of the space talk and go into some of these other things like Howard Humongous and things like that, I want to talk about the big bagel. So from what I'm understanding, so in everybody's mind, picture a bagel, and in the middle of the bagel is the hole, but in the middle of the hole, it goes from big to infinitesimally little small. Okay.
Right.
And so from what I'm understanding is the energy comes up from the middle, and because of the steepness of the slopes of the bagel, it is gravity that is forcing it up and over. Okay, so that's where we get the speeding up of the universe right now.
Right.
And then it basically slows back down as it goes back over the hump.
Right.
And then the pull of the antimatter, right? Antimatter, is that right? Am I right?
Right.
It pulls it back down with its own gravity field.
Okay, so this is a terrific summation. Absolutely terrific. But
thank you.
One little correction. Okay, so we've got that infinitesimally, anally retentive, puckered little hole at the center of the bagel.
It's out the top and out the bottom.
Yeah, and that's where the Big Bang takes place.
Yeah.
And now I was trying to solve a problem. It was when I was 16 years old, I came up with this theory. Okay. When I was working at the world's largest cancer research center. And I was trying to solve something called the CPT problem. And the CPT problem, the charge, parity, and time problem, is that if matter and antimatter were created in equal amounts at the same time, where the hell is all the antimatter? So, in the Big Bagel theory, the normal universe comes out of the top of the bagel. The antimatter universe comes big banging out of the bottom of the bagel. Wow. They are both pushed by some extraordinarily explosive force. And they move rapidly. That's called inflation, coming out of the hole, because the steepness of the curve means rapid movement. And then they get to the hump. And what happens at the hump? It's like a cannonball running out of energy and going in a parabolic arc. They begin to descend toward each other, and they accelerate. They get faster and faster as they're descending. Why? Because even though one is an antimatter universe and one is a matter universe, they share a common language, and that language is gravity. And so their gravity is calling to each other and pulling them faster and faster into the arms of each other. And then on the outer rim of the universe, the matter and antimatter annihilate, and guess what they become? The hole at the center of another big bagel.
So 1.68 million years? Billion
Roughly
years.
Something like that, yes.
1.68 billion years.
Yeah,
and we're at 7.7 right now. Is that?
No, we're at, oh wait, hang on a second. I forgot to turn this off.
Take your time.
Let's just turn this off. Okay, so God knows what that is. So we've only got a few billion years before we come to the end of the universe. We're at 13.7 billion years, and the hump was at 7.7 billion years.
Gotcha.
So we don't have that long to go, but it's certainly an immense time in human terms. I feel, this is just my feeling, you can criticize me on this, I feel that we get better and better at passing along information every 5 years.
Yeah.
And it is our obligation to take everything that we have learned and roll it up in one ball and roll it with rough stride through the iron gates of life, to quote Andrew Marvell, to take that and roll it through the annihilation of the universe on the bagel's outer edge and into the next big bagel. So that big bagel can start out knowing everything that we have ever learned.
Yeah.
So
here, I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but it almost seems as if you would agree with, I think it was Mayans, Aztecs. They said that, remember the whole 2012 thing? They said that it wasn't a death of civilization. It was going to be a death of consciousness.
Right.
And that universal consciousness would be the next Rome.
Right.
It almost seems as if you kind of, you agree with that. You say, this generation is going to give to the next, which entitled means that the knowledge base gets bigger and people start sharing more, and universal consciousness creates, right? It begins to evolve as we see it as in today's world. You can share knowledge with somebody all across the world now. So,
well, my book Global Brain points out that this ability to share knowledge worldwide has been part of this globe ever since life began.
Really?
Yes, because life forms, bacteria in those days, bacteria take their genomes, and if they run into trouble, if they find a desert where they expected to find food, and there's no way for them to survive, they pack up their gene very neatly.
Okay.
And they dissolve. They dissolve themselves. They commit suicide by dissolving. Okay. But the gene packet they left behind is a warning to other genes: don't go here. This is a bad place. Right.
Gotcha.
But also, genes manage through a whole bunch of devices to take little genetic snippets and spread them around. All kinds of other bacteria will adopt those genetic snippets. And those genetic snippets can travel worldwide. Even before there were aircraft, they could travel worldwide. There's, the wind that they could travel on.
Birds.
Yeah. Well, even for birds, when there were only bacteria, and that's all there were.
Really?
So this global brain has been going on for a long time, but the internet came into use in the 1970s. It was invented by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This is going to sound crazy, I had a unique privilege. By 1988, I had run my own company for 15 years. And all of a sudden, and I needed to get out because I'd learned everything that I felt I could learn in the music industry. And I was halfway through writing my first book, The Lucifer Principle. Okay. a scientific expedition into the forces of history. And all of a sudden, I got sick, very sick. And no doctor could figure out what was wrong with me. And finally, I walked into my office and said to the staff, I don't know what is happening to me, but I could be dying, but I'm giving you the business. And I'll be gone in 2 weeks. And I spent the next 15 years in bed, and I spent 5 of those years too weak to speak, and too weak to have another person in the room with me. It was sheer hell and sheer torture. But I had envied the college professors who had access to the internet in the 1970s.
They still could use.
Yeah, and in 1983, a bright entrepreneur had gotten those of us in the record industry who were willing to pay for a subscription onto the internet.
Okay.
And it changed everything for us. So by 1988, I'd been on the internet for 5 years. Okay. And the only way I could exist as a human, because I was stripped of every aspect of my humanity, and the only way I could be human was on the internet. Wow. So I had 2 computers set up next to my bed with a keyboard and a little Chinese box that allowed me to control both computers from one keyboard and one monitor. And I went out on the internet and I started to make friends, and I founded 2 international scientific groups while I was too weak to talk, and I wrote 3 books. Wow. So the internet, which does yoke us globally together, became something I was forced to be reborn on in 1988. And most people didn't get the internet until around 1995. So that put me a long time ahead of most people. But look what I was doing. I was on a philosophy of history group based in Siberia. I ran a group called the Group Selection Squad that changed the way we think in evolutionary biology. And that had members from Israel, Holland, and Australia, plus the United States. In other words, and I was introduced to a guy in Moscow at the Keldysh Institute of Applied Mathematics of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Pavel Kurakin, and we became collaborators. He's a theoretical physicist and mathematician. And so I wrote my theoretical physics paper with him. How is that for global reach?
That's reach. Yeah.
I could not walk. I could not walk further than my bathroom. I could not even walk as far as my own kitchen. And yet I was dealing with Siberia and Moscow.
I read somewhere you were also a professor or a
core faculty member. I was named a visiting scholar at the graduate psychology department at NYU, despite the fact that I never got any of my graduate degrees. It's the graduate
never showed up once in person.
And I was named a core faculty member at the Graduate Institute in Meriden, Connecticut. Wow. So, plus I've been either published or I've given lectures at scholarly conferences on 12 different scientific fields.
The power of the mind over the body.
Yeah, right. So, plus, science was my life. It was my life when I was 10, and it's been my life ever since. But I wanted to understand the gods inside from the point of view of science. And that means not just understanding them.
That was your original God. Your original God was the science God. Let me follow this one.
Right.
So, in that science question, you said in the very beginning, and I said that I wanted to touch back on this real quick. Do you see yourself, and this is a 2-part question, so bear with me here. The first question being, do you see yourself as a visionary or as someone who can see things in ways that others cannot ahead of time? And the reason I ask that is because you talked about dark energy almost 40 years before it was ever even proven. And if this was the medieval times, or if this was, the 1000s or 1492 or something, you'd be hailed as a prophet. You'd be hailed as some kind of what do they call those oracles? What is that? I mean, how does that?
It's a little weird. I have been working with the 11th president of India, Dr. A.P.J. Kalam, who was the only trusted politician in Southeast Asia, who was a superstar. Wow. And we were working for 4 years together on harvesting solar power in space and transmitting it down to Earth. Well, he and I were both at a conference in San Diego once, and because my relationship had soured with the intercessor, the person who hooked us together, I thought Dr. Kalam didn't want to see me. And then the head of the so the head of the National Space Society came to me and said, Dr. Kalam wants to see you. Okay, I can't resist that. So I got into line. People, you know, a Pez dispenser? So people were lined up to go see Dr. Kalam, and they were going through security, like the candies in a Pez dispenser. And I got in the line with everybody else because Dr. Kalam had summoned me. And when I got upstairs to Dr. Kalam's suite, he was talking to some very important people, and I did not want to interrupt. So I tried to find a seat up against the wall where I wouldn't interrupt them. And all of a sudden, Dr. Kalam's eyes met mine. And it was as if we had known each other since first grade. And his face lit up, and he left the important people that he was with, and he came over. I don't know how he recognized me, Twiz. He had never seen me before. And now there's protocol when you're with a former head of state. And there are certain things you're allowed to do and certain things you're not allowed to do. And one of the things you're not allowed to do is hug that person, hug that former head of state. So Dr. Kalam came over to me and gave me a great big hug. Then he dismissed the important people that he'd been meeting with, and he got all excited. One day I had sent him a copy of my book, The Genius of the Beast, A Radical Re-Vision of Capitalism. And I had done it as a courtesy. I knew that it was going to end up in his slush pile and that his slush pile was 4 feet high. And I got an email from Dr. Kalam personally. He's not supposed to do that. That's against protocol. And he said, I sat down at 4 in the afternoon to read your book and stopped at 10 o'clock so that I could email you. And he said, it's absolutely brilliant. And he said in 10 different ways, it's visionary. It's a visionary creation. So Dr. Kalam, in this meeting in San Diego at the hotel suite, said that he had something he wanted me to read. It was the introduction to a book, an introduction he had just written. And so I read it, and Dr. Kalam stood this far away from me. He stood less than 2 feet away from me, and his eyes were locked on my eyes. And I could see what he was looking for. He wanted to see if I lit up with the recognition of what he had written as visionary, the way he had lit up when he had read my work. And my face did light up because it was fucking visionary. And then I realized suddenly what he meant by visionary, that there are some people who can see things that other people can't see. It's like that Elon Musk experience 15 years ago when Elon hadn't gotten anything off the ground.
He knew right then and there.
Right. It's like that meeting. It's in the limousine with Rufus's manager, with Shaka Khan's manager, telling him, if you do this, I will deliver you a star. Now, Twiz, I've only said that twice in my life. And both times it's come true.
He was right.
Yeah, I've only said it because I know it. So how you know these things at a gut level, I do not know. And then there was the night, it's a long story, we'll have to cover it some other time if you want.
Most definitely, most definitely.
Right, when I was with Michael Jackson, and he had decided to cancel his tour, and I was asked to fly to California immediately because they said I was the only person that he would listen to. And when I was talking to Michael Jackson in a darkened dressing trailer, I had a vision, and it's the only visual vision I've ever had. And I saw Michael's ribs as golden gates. And I saw those golden gates open. And I saw 10,000 kids inside of Michael's chest, his kids. So where these visions come from, I do not know. And there have only
unless you're on just some good damn acid at that time.
Yeah, so in my case, I probably only had about 5 of them in my life. But every single one of them so far has come true.
Man, that's good. You know, I mean, half of me's torn and half of me's rejoicing. Let me put it that way.
Well, there's another tiny answer to the question, and I just realized this 2 months ago, because other kids would never allow me to do anything they could do. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. They forced me to do the things that they could not do.
And so in turn, you soaked up knowledge they'll never have.
Right, and it was a tremendous benefit to me. They did me a tremendous service. It was painful at the time. So was having chronic fatigue syndrome, being in bed for 15 years. But those experiences all proved to be incredibly valuable.
Well, you know, there's that old what is it, the old saying that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
If you take that philosophy, then you see everything as a blessing. You see everything as a learning lesson. You see everything as an opportunity to grow and become better, right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
Ultimately, the human psyche, like our quest is perfection. We are achieving perfection, whether it's in our hearts, in our mind, in our dreams, whatever it may be. The quest to always want the best, to have the best, to be the best. That's just a part of human nature. So,
right.
Yeah. So real quickly, with just about 5-10 minutes left here, you know, Madonna, Michael Jackson. I mean, you're naming off names that are just wow. And I want to ask Harry Humongous quickly before we exit out of this, okay? Or not Harry, Howard Humongous. I don't know.
Right.
Sorry. Howard Humongous. I want to ask Howard Humongous, what does it take to find your God?
That's a very good question, Twiz, and I'm not sure I can answer it. First of all, we only see each other, we only see ourselves in the mirrors of each other's eyes. Okay. When you're on stage and those gods inside of you come alive and take you over, it's because of the attention of that audience. Mm-hmm. You are seeing an aspect of yourself you never get to see in the eyes of others in the most real way possible.
Yes.
Often when you need to make a decision, you don't know it, but you've already made the decision, but you can't articulate it. Right. So when you go talk to a friend, the value of the conversation is usually not so much the advice the friend gives you as the opportunity the friend gives you to articulate the answer that you have already arrived at on the level of the cells below the floorboards of the self.
Yeah.
On a nonverbal level.
Yeah.
So to find the gods inside of you, you need others who will encourage you. But then, Twiz, look at me. When I was a kid, I was about to say when I was a kid, I had nobody to reflect me because I had no friends and I had no parents, right?
Yeah.
But I was reflected in books. Look what reading Albert Einstein did for me to change my life. Yeah. And that's others. That's other people. Yep. We only grow on the trellises of others. We find our unique selves by growing on the trellises of others. But it helps, you know, John Mellencamp could not have answered that question about the Ketchup commercial alone.
Yeah,
he needed me as a mirror. He needed me to reaffirm what his role had become, solely because of who he is, solely because of the gods inside of him, what role he has in life.
Mr. Bloom, I want to tell you this much. I hope that my gods bring me my Mr. Bloom. You know, I am thrilled. I am absolutely thrilled that I got to spend this time with you. I think it's made me a better person because, you know, coming into this interview, I was like, you know, am I worthy? Am I qualified? Am I going to do good enough? But, you know, you go through all the pre-trial things that we go through, and you've helped me grow with this interview. And by doing such, you've allowed me to become, you know, a better person today. And so I thank you for that, because isn't that our objective?
I thank you for that. Because just like you, just like everybody listening to this, there are days when I've woken up and gone, why am I here? Nobody wants me. I'm of value to nobody. And my work has pulled me out of that. We all feel that way.
That's my music. That's my music.
Right. So we all have to have a reason, a greater meaning in our lives, something that we're aiming towards, something that is bigger than ourselves.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And with that, what is your last? What is the last thing? If this was the last thing anybody was to hear from you, what would it be?
Since there are no gods, it is our job to do her work. Our job is to take our miseries, our insecurities, and our lusts and turn them into wings with which our children's children shall overcome.
Wow.
Because deity, divinity, is not a thing out there in the sky. Divinity is an aspiration inside of us. And only we can do the work that we imagine to be divine.
Wow. Wow. I agree. I agree. I read interviews all the time. Kids said they always say up and coming, the best, greatest, whatever. When I read your bio, I was like, okay, great. This is going to be now. I'm a firm believer. Good job. You've made me a believer. You are truly a visionary mind of my generation, and I am blessed to be able to spend this time. If you would ever like to do this again, please. I am more than thrilled to spend another chunk of my life with you whenever you're ready.
That's terrific. So Twiz, it was a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah.
And
do you have any books for sale right now that you're promoting?
Yes.
Einstein, me, and Michael Jackson.
This book, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me: A Search for Soul and the Power Pits of Rock and Roll.
There you go.
Which all kinds of astonishing things have been said about it. Freddie DeMann, the manager of Madonna and Michael Jackson, says, amazing. The writing is revelatory. So hopefully, if you get to read this book, it'll change your life. Hopefully.
I would love to. I hope to one day. That's for sure. As soon as I can get my hands on a copy, I'm definitely going to read it. And then we're going to have a conversation about it.
Okay, terrific. Well, Twiz, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, man. Same to you. And of course, I'm going to get you a copy of all this, and this will be on the station and whatnot. And I'm also going to share this among my personal fans and followers because I've thoroughly enjoyed this one. So,
terrific.
If
and I will Facebook and Twitter it to my faithful 15,000.
I appreciate you so very much, Mr. Bloom. Thank you. And thank you for making my mind a smarter place today. It was blessed. I love it. Thank you.
Have a good night, Twiz.
You too, Mr. Bloom. You too.